At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. We will bring to the Iraqi people food and medicines and supplies and freedom, 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 freedom.
Back in January of 2003, then U.S. President George W. Bush outlined the basis for the subsequent invasion of Iraq in his State of the Union address. The speech entirely focused on Iraq, with Bush calling the Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein a, quote, brutal dictator with ties to terrorism, posing a direct threat to the United States. He pledged to disarm Hussein and bring freedom to the Iraqi people, something the U.S. was supposedly already doing in Afghanistan.
The dictator of Iraq is not disarming. To the contrary, he is deceiving. From intelligence sources, we know, for instance, that thousands of Iraqi security personnel are at work hiding documents and materials from the UN inspectors, sanitizing inspection sites, and monitoring the inspectors themselves. If Saddam Hussein does not fully disarm, for the safety of our people and for the peace of the world, we will lead a coalition to disarm him.
Later, it turned out that Hussein had not ramped up his nuclear weapons program, and what triggered the American invasion and subsequent occupation of Iraq appeared to have been a, quote, pack of lies. The CIA's top weapons inspector in Iraq closed the investigation, finding nothing in 2005, 2 years after the invasion. The U.S. war in Iraq began on the 19th of March 2003, when the U.S., joined by its allies, launched Operation Iraqi Freedom. The coalition started a bombing campaign directed against the Iraqi government and military installations. Despite months of passive and massive anti-war protests worldwide, U.S. forces invaded Iraq from Kuwait in the south within days, and 3 weeks into the invasion, Baghdad fell. The years of invasion and the subsequent rise of the conflict with Daesh have taken a grim toll on Iraq and its people. There were at least 180,000 documented civilian deaths in the country, while a number of household surveys estimate the actual figure to be closer to 1 million. Most Iraqis died from aerial bombings, shelling, and suicide attacks. Over 9 million people either fled the country or were left internally displaced. The U.S.-led coalition lost almost 5,000 of its own soldiers. The war also left many Iraqis of different generations struggling to live with memories of loss and suffering. Some of them shared their stories with us.
The streets were packed with barriers and tunnels. I remember it well. Baghdad became a battlefield. Tanks and security forces of all kinds had been deployed there.
Our life became a living hell. Because as a child, you're supposed to see beautiful things, but we saw bullets, tanks and cannons. Terror for humanity, children and society as a whole. There was nothing but war.
Most of the families lost members, and I lost one of my brothers because of the bombings. The Americans were killing everything in front of them.
One of my sons wanted to celebrate his success with his studies, so my wife gave him money to buy some junk food and eat out with his friends, and they sat to eat near an American base. He was shot in the head by the Americans. He died on the spot.
My friends were killed by the explosions at that time. My neighbor was killed by the Americans when he was going to buy a can of cooking gas. They thought he was a suicide bomber and killed him.
These are very difficult memories for me. A mortar shell fell at the door of our house and killed one of my playmates.
We used to live in Baghdad. Our dreams were shattered. We wished to complete our studies, but we could not because of the war and the killings in the streets. We had to leave our homes and go to another place.
We were in Baghdad. We stayed at home and closed the windows, covered them with blankets. We were afraid of a chemical bombardment. We saw America come to us. They told us that Iraq would become a paradise. They published news about how they were distributing food, but those were all false dreams.
Only after I turned 14 years old was I able to leave the house with my friends. Before that, I couldn't even think about it. I was afraid something would happen outside, and even now I don't want to leave without telling my family where I'm going.
I remember my first day at the kindergarten, the first day at elementary school. The textbooks showed pictures of the former regime, but they took them away and gave us new, different books. I'll never forget the close-up of a bullet, the sound of an explosion, images of smoke, an American soldier, a life full of blood.
The Americans arrested my father. He did not belong to any party. He was working at the market. He was kept in prison until 2018. I didn't have a chance to know my father. After he was released, his health deteriorated. We took him to Germany for treatment, but after 4 surgeries, he died.
You may say to me your childhood was stolen, and I didn't have a childhood. I spent it among war and terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, among slaughter, Americans bombing Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda bombing Americans. When we went to school, I used to walk along the wall so as not to be shot and killed.
I lost my father, my cousin, my brother-in-law. Unfortunately, the Americans did not fulfill their promise. You heard Iraq. Because of you, I lost my loved ones. You hurt us a lot.
The United States, you destroyed Iraq. You weakened national sovereignty. And over 20 years, you failed to manage Iraq.
Stop destroying, stop controlling us and our resources. Let the Iraqi people live in peace.